Hey everybody, how are you doing? Elf Tekking here, and Zoro past chapter! Yeah, we all knew this was going to happen eventually. A chapter about Zoro's past. A Zoro past chapter. Are you ready for it? No, you're not ready for it. Even if you think you're ready for it, you're not ready for it. But let's dive right in. This will be One Piece chapter 1033 titled Shimosuke Kouzaburo. Oh yeah, there's a lot of stuff, like a breadcrumb trail of clues throughout this entire arc on who's Shimosuke Kouzaburo. You know, he's the dude that forged the Enma, he forged the Wado Ichimonji. We got some stuff in an SBS a couple of tankobons ago about how he left Wano 55 years ago to start the Shimosuke village in the East Blue, which is where Zoro and Kuina and Koshiro are all from. But what about the man himself? We're gonna find out today. But first, we're gonna see an adorable cover page with Tashigi and Smoker playing with a bunch of penguins. Yeah! I mean, I have to mention that, and I also feel like that's the reason that Oda put Tashigi and Smoker on the cover, because we're talking about, you know, Kouzaburo Shimosuke, who's from Shimosuke Village, where Kuina is from, and Kuina and Tashigi look very similar, and there's that whole, like, you know, romance thing between Zoro and Tashigi, which hasn't really been referenced in, like, you know, 900 chapters, but still, I'm hopeful for it, you know? We'll see how it goes. Also, you know, at the beginning of Wano, I was actually really hoping at some point that Tashigi was going to show up, because she's the sword nerd and everything, and she's got the book of, like, oh, here's all the Meito grade swords. Like, it would be really cool to see Tashigi in Wano, but given the fact that we know the government's going to show up, I doubt that Smoker and Tashigi are going to make an appearance at this point, especially since how late we are in the arc. We're kind of ramping things up to the final battles here between, like, Big Mom Kid and Law, and then Luffy and Kaido, and Zoro and King here, Sanji and Queen. So, I mean, I guess it's not impossible that they might show up at some point, but it's becoming very unlikely. So, it is nice to at least see them in cover page format, where the penguins are all pretending to be superheroes, and Tashigi's pretending to be the evil villain, and she's playing with them, and then Smoker's just off to the background, just like on a freaking piece of ice, just smoking a cigar, and he's just like, are we done yet, Tashigi? And then one of the penguins looks over at Smoker and is like actually genuinely terrified of him, and he's like, ah! And Smoker just kind of looks down at the penguin like, what are you looking at? And he's like, ah, I'm sorry, sir. So that was pretty funny. All right, now we get into it. We get into the thick of it, all right? Zoro versus King, already in progress. Okay, so last chapter, Enma began to suck the hockey straight out of Zoro's arm, okay? And he begins to yell out in pain, like, oh, what the hell? And then we cut over to see Hiyori playing the shamisen in front of Orochi. Now, we don't get any information on that to see what's going on with Hiyori and Orochi. I guess we'll find out about that later. Or even if that was Hiyori, could have been Toki, could have been Orochi's hallucination, who knows? So we cut back to Zoro having the hockey absorbed out of him by Enma, and he's just like, oh, really, Enma? Really? We're gonna do this right now? Right now in front of the giant pteranodon I'm fighting? Come on! So he's going back into the tug-of-war thing he was doing earlier. It seemed to imply that this doesn't always happen when he wields Enma. Like, when he first picked the sword up, it began to, like, test him by, like, absorbing his haki, and then he, like, pulled it back into himself. But, you know, while he was training with Enma, he trained with this sword for, like, a good number of days before the operation at Onigashima really kicked off. And the entire time that he's been using Enma at Onigashima, it doesn't seem to have been using this. I mean, yes, he did admit that using Enma, you know, required a little bit more finesse, a little bit more skill, and it did take his haki out of him, but we haven't seen something like this since he first picked it up, okay? So it seemed like Zoro felt like he'd sort of, like, gotten a handle on it, like, okay, I can wield this sword without having my haki absorbed, but now all of a sudden this is happening now, okay? And so King takes notice of this, and he's just like, oh, having some problems with your sword? Well, you know, I have the remedy for that. So he starts charging right towards Zoro, and Zoro's just like, oh, crap, and he's trying to get his haki back. King, he kind of charges full speed, rushing at Zoro, and then he just kind of, boo! He just kind of stops right in front of him, right? Like, he's zipping really fast, and Zoro's like, oh man, I'm not ready, just, boo! He just stops right in front of him, like he was sort of trying to intimidate him. You know, that thing that people would do, like they get up in your face and they just be like, He's like, ha, you flinched, and they punch you in the arm, because that's how that works. That's just law right there. But no, anyway, yeah, King does that. He just stops right in front of Zoro, and Zoro's like, what are you trying to pull? Like, what is this? You know, it's like a game of chicken. Like, what are you? All right. And he just takes his sword and just stabs King right in the chest, right in the center. And King's just like, ah ha ha, nice shot. And Zoro's like, what are you talking? And that boom! And then King blows up. Yeah, King just explodes. Like, I really know. Does he have dynamite inside of his gimp suit? I wouldn't be shocked if he did. Is his body just combustible? Also would not surprise me, given the fact that he has flames coming out of his back. So if his body was like an animated, you know, stick of TNT, that would make sense as well, just his natural biology. He's a Lunarian, and we've never heard of Lunarians up until this arc and up until King, so pretty much anything is on the table right now. You could say that there is a mini nuclear reaction going on inside of his body, and he can generate, you know, fission or fusion or whatever it is, whatever the sun runs on. You could say that he does that, and I could buy it right at this point. So King explodes, he takes a big chunk of Onigashima out with him, and then we cut back down to the Skull Dome where we see Sanji fighting Queen. So there's a little bit of the battle that has happened since the last time. Last time that happened is, you know, Sanji took out the Den Mushi and basically made that murder pact with Zoro, like, if I'm no longer myself by the end of this battle, you're gonna have to finish me off. And Zoro's like, yeah, okay, good, I'll pencil you in, we'll be alright. So, and then, you know, Sanji begins to attack Queen, and it seems like Sanji did land a solid hit on Queen and blasted him through a bunch of walls. Okay, so he probably used Diablo Jambe, you know, the Hell Memories technique. This is probably the after effects of that, slamming into Queen and knocking him through a bunch of walls. But Queen is a cyborg and a brachiosaur and an all-star, so he's not really perturbed by that. He just gets back up and he's walking through the hallway, and he's just like, ha ha ha, that was the pirate hunter you were talking to just now on that Den Mushi, huh? Yeah, let me just set the record straight right now and just crush any sort of hope that you guys have. He's not gonna be able to defeat King. Alright, like, it's just not gonna happen. He is gonna die, and it's gonna be messy, alright? Now, here's the thing you gotta understand about this. Queen and King do not like each other, okay? They are not friends, and it's not even the sort of, like, rivalry that Zoro and Sanji have. There's parallels to that, but at the end of the day, Zoro and Sanji are friends. They had a murder pact together, so you know they're besties, right? They have, like, little necklaces. Like, Sanji takes out his little BFF necklace. Zoro's in it. Zoro's just like, all right, I'll murder you after this is over if you're not yourself. Pulls out the necklace. Yep, you damn cook. You know, so they are friends. They're nakama at the end of the day. King and Queen genuinely do not like each other, and they only interact with one another because they're both in Kaido's service, okay? It's sort of like, you know, they're like the guy a few cubicles down from where you work, and occasionally you have to, you know, talk to him and work together, but he's actually kind of a douche. You know, that kind of situation is between King and Queen. But here we have Queen getting up, and he's just like, yeah, Zoro has no chance against King. Like, I don't like the dude, but, you know, he's wicked strong, and he is one of the last surviving Lunarians that exist. Now, Queen does not explain exactly what a Lunarian is, but he gives a little bit about their backstory. He says, they are a species that has all but been wiped out and extinct. However, it's said that way back in the day, they could survive any natural environment. All right, I'm going to pause right now and I'm going to repeat that. They can survive any natural environment. That might be the ticket. That might be the little piece of fine print in order to get out of this situation, okay? So they have an insane amount of endurance. They can not just survive, they can thrive in any natural environment, okay? And they were even revered as gods way back in the day. So Sanji comes up with the obvious question I think a lot of people have when somebody says that, is like they could survive any natural environment. Well, how the hell did they all get wiped out then? And Queen is like, in some translations, he's like, yeah, just go ask him yourself. And then he charges up one of his beams and he fires it at Sanji, and then we cut away. Another translation is, you know, I guess you'll just have to read a history book then. And then, you know, Robin's ears perk up. So Robin shows up with Sanji, just like, here's a history book, Sanji, and then she leaves. And Sanji's like, okay. And he pulls out the history book and he's like, all right, now I know what's going on. That would have been funny. That would have been a little comedy routine. But no, so Queen Queen clearly knows more than what he's saying, but it's the middle of a battle, so he's not going to go into the whole history. He's like, oh, well, since you asked. You know, Queen transforms back into his human form. He sits down, pulls out a little book, takes out a cigar, and he's just like, all right, so... the story goes approximately 850 years ago during the Void Century, and Sanji's like, ooh, this is gonna get good. He sits down and makes himself a cup of coffee, and he's like, let's listen to this. Now, Queen knows a little more. I don't know if Queen knows, like, the whole story, like, everything involving the Lunarians and stuff, because it does seem the Lunarian history does connect to the Void Century, and we all know how hard it is to find out stuff about the Void Century. That's why it's called the Void Century, but he knows more than he's letting on here, so who knows? Maybe if Sanji defeats Queen, he'll reveal a little bit more about it at the very end or something. I don't know. Now, a couple of things about the Lunarians, though. They were considered gods because probably they can thrive in any environment, and that makes sense given from what we learned about from Marco. Marco and Whitebeard, you know, Whitebeard told Marco about this rumor that way back in the day, on top of the Red Line, a race of gods existed, okay? Now, the Red Line is this big chunk of red earth that doesn't really seem to have a lot of hospitable environments on it. First off, it's like way high up in the atmosphere. Not quite as high as like Sky Islands, but we're still talking like 5,000–6,000 meters above sea level. The oxygen is very low up there. The only area that we know on top of the Red Line that's hospitable is Marijois, and Marijois is mostly artificial. You have the artificial, like the trees and the forests they planted up there, and they probably have some mechanism that maybe makes it easier to breathe at that high altitude, and you know, it's like a place of paradise for the celestial dragons, and Castle Pangea is there and everything like that. So the idea is, before all of that existed, before Marijois, before, you know, Castle Pangea and all of that, it was the Lunarians that lived up there in that very harsh environment with very little vegetation, very cold, and so they were able to thrive in that environment. Also, the fact that they could summon fire kind of once again lends me back to, like, were they maybe a race that lived in like a volcano? Who knows? Maybe, I mean, the Red Line is a giant continent that stretches the entire length of the planet. There's, you know, there's probably a volcano or something along that line. Actually, you know what? Reverse Mountain kind of does look like a volcano. Imagine if, like, Reverse Mountain used to be a volcano, but then it had this big giant eruption, and, you know, it made those cracks that lead up to the top of it that head down into the Grand Line, so it's an extinct volcano, and it just filled with water because of the oceans. I mean, maybe it's possible. At any rate, yeah, at some point along the Red Line, there was probably some kind of volcano or something, because I refuse to believe it at this point. King literally uses Diable Jambe to attack Zoro in this chapter. I'm not even kidding. He lights his leg on fire and then kicks Zoro with it. So there's some kind of fire thing involved here. So if that's the situation, I'm thinking lava or magma has something to do with this in some capacity, right? Well, anyway, that's all we really get from Queen and Sanji. So now we cut back to Zoro. Little bit of a side thing, though. We see in this chapter a few full views of Onigashima. Not like a full page spread. It's like in a side panel. But we do see Momo beginning to tow the island away. And once again, it's from a distance, so we don't see it too well. But it looks like Momo has taken his flame clouds and maybe using them as like rope to like tether himself to the island, and then he just starts grabbing all of the flame clouds like rope, and now he's just like, all right, time to fly. And he's just beginning to pull the island slowly away, or at least he's attempting to. We don't really know if he's making any progress, but that looks like to see what he's doing. It also kind of looks like he's using his flame clouds to attach them to Kaido's flame clouds and then pull them that way. That was an idea. That might work. I don't know, but it's just a little thing to mention off to the side that I think some people might have missed. So then we have Zoro recovering from the blast, you know, when King just blew himself up akin to like Mr. Five and the Bomb Fruit, okay? So Zoro gets up and he's just like, oh man, if I would have used armament hockey even a second later, I would have been dead, right? Okay, so he used armament to guard himself against the explosion, but out of the dust cloud emerges King, back in his regular form, and he looks none the worse for wear. Even his clothing is still intact, except for that little piece that he knocked off of King's helmet. King looks perfectly fine. He just emerges, kind of like he did eat the Bomb Fruit or something. It's very eerily similar to the way Mr. Five detonates, okay? So he walks out of the explosion, and Zoro gets up, and he's just like, you gotta be kidding me. That a giant explosion? Like, what is this guy made out of? Like, is this body literally antimatter? Like, what is this guy? He's not hurt at all. And so Zoro's like, okay, you know what? Screw this. He takes out his Watto, and he's just like, all right, this calls for the one and done, one sword style, high octane, you know, one death kind of move, okay? So he uses the upgraded form of Lion Song, you know, the lethal Lion Song or the deadly Lion Song, and then he's just like, Lion Song! And keep in mind, same technique he used to defeat Mr. 1, Daz Bones back at Alabasta, but the upgraded form. And so he just, boom, and he speeds, and he lands a direct freaking hit of this attack. And you know he used hockey, and you know he was focused. He used point blank attack, lethal Lion Song, hits King head on, slices him from the head right down the middle, and Zoro lands, and he's just like, all right, did that do something? Please tell me that did something. He turns around, and you see, like, just the sheer amount of, like, friction that Zoro used. Like, so you see, like, the steam or, like, the smoke or whatever, like, coming off of King's body, like, coming off of the slash that he used. But King is still standing. He's not bleeding. He doesn't look like he's gonna get knocked out or he's dead or he's gonna split in half. It'd be funny if, like, Zoro's like, all right, lethal Lion Song. He looks around, he's still standing there. He's like, all right, give it a second, give it a second. This is the cool scene in the movie where the hero slices the villain in half, but he does it so damn fast that they don't realize. So give it like 5 seconds, and then King will be like, you failed to defeat me, Rora Zoro. And he just splits in half. But it's not happening. Zoro's like, all right, give it a second. Ah, shit, it's not happening. So Zoro's like, you gotta be kidding me. You gotta be kidding me. Are you serious? One sword style. This is the finishing move. This is like one of my strongest techniques. I use the Watto in hockey. It didn't even dent him. Not a speck of blood. Come on, give me something, right? So this is going back to the whole thing that King apparently does not bleed. By the way, get used to me going back and forth and grabbing swords, because that's going to be this entire chapter review. But anyway, yeah, he's like, he doesn't bleed. And so even an attack like that doesn't do anything. So now it's kind of reminding me of, like, all right, you ever play a video game where, you know, you level up, you're really high level, and you're just like, oh man, I could just steamroll through the enemies with no big deal, right? I could just walk into a field and just annihilate a bunch of enemies, and you're just hacking and slashing, not really paying attention to skill or anything like that. And then you finally get to a boss, and you're like, all right, I'm just gonna hack and slash the crap out of this boss. But it's the one boss you actually have to be smart, and you have to use like a special combination of moves, or you have to have a special item, or otherwise they're invulnerable. Yeah, that seems to be the situation right here with Zoro, where it's like, Zoro's ridiculously strong. We know he's strong, we know he's got hockey. That is not working, all right? He cannot just blitz his way through King. He can't just bust out like I feel like even if Zoro were to use his Ashura and the Dead Man's Game, the same technique he used against Kaido, I feel like he's doing something wrong fundamentally with this fight involving King. He needs to figure out the nature of King and what he is and the weakness that he has, because he has to have a weakness somewhere, and he has to figure that out, because if he doesn't, he's not going to be able to overcome King and defeat him with sheer physical force. It doesn't matter what technique he uses, how much just raw physical power he just uses to slash him, it just won't work, okay? And so that's the kind of impression I'm getting right here, okay? So Zoro slashes him. It doesn't do anything. In fact, King retaliates right away. After getting hit with the Lion Song, King grabs the little crest on his head again, stretches it back, and launches the Pteranodon's, you know, secret technique that it used in days long past, and launches that laser beam, except this time it actually hits Zoro. Kind of grazes him. It hits him like along the side, because at the same time he tries to dodge it, Enma begins to suck his hockey out again. And so he's like, ah, crap! And he gets hit by this laser, he gets knocked back. While this happens, Zoro loses all of his katanas. They all just scatter, okay? And the ground gets destroyed as well. So Zoro is literally falling down as he's trying to grab his swords in the sky, and King just kind of turns into a Pteranodon. He kind of looks down at him, and he's just like, ha ha ha, a swordsman being defeated by his own sword? Now that's a first, I gotta tell you. And so Zoro's falling, and he's trying to grab his swords in the middle of the air. And this is an awesome scene. I love this chapter. I love any chapter that starts to go into the lore and the backstory of katanas and Zoro swords in particular. So I love this chapter. I'm serious. And then we get the flashback with Kouzaburo. This is one of my best chapters, one of my favorite ones of all of 2021. I gotta tell you right now, okay? So, the first sword that Zoro grabs as he's falling, is his Sandai Katetsu, okay? Shown here, held together by Fun Tack, but Zoro's is probably a little bit more sturdy. So he grabs the Sandai. He's like, Sandai Katetsu! He grabs it. And then he flashes back to the memory of meeting Tenguyama Hitetsu. And Tenguyama was like, oh, I see you already have the Sandai Katetsu. That's actually one of my swords. I've actually made that one. And Zoro's like, whoa, really? That's cool. You know, small world, huh? Small world. He also flashes back to one of my favorite side characters in all of One Piece, Ippon Matsu, man. That's right, Ippon Matsu has a few flashback appearances in this chapter. I love this dude. What, you don't know Ippon Matsu? Let me tell you about Ippon Matsu. Ippon Matsu is the shopkeep that works at Logtown. He still has a shop there. He lives with his wife, and he sells swords. He's the one that sold the Sandai. We didn't even really sell it. That's the one where he had the Sandai and the Yubashiri, and so Zoro did the test with the Sandai, you know, throwing it up in the air, and it like dodged him, and then it hit the ground, and he's like, I'll take it. And Ippon Matsu was so impressed with Zoro's luck and his skill as a swordsman, he's like, you know what, just take the Sandai. In fact, I'll do you one better. And he retrieves his family heirloom, the Yubashiri, the real Wazumono. He's like, my shop isn't that big. This is the best sword I have, though, bar none. It's the real Wazumono Yubashiri. And Zoro's like, I can't afford that. And he's just like, doesn't matter. I'll give it to you free of charge. You're the first, you know, worthy swordsman to come in this shop in a while. I'll give it to you, right? And so it was also implied Ippon Matsu was like, I'll trust that man to achieve my dreams. So you get the impression he's sort of like a shopkeep in like D&D, where it's just like, the old shopkeep in the town that makes swords and sells them. Yeah, he wanted to be a famous swordsman at one point in his youth, but he just couldn't make the cut, you know? And so, you know, he's like, you seem like a worthy swordsman. Here, have my finest sword if you can, you know, finish a test of skill or a test of luck or something like that. So I love Ippon Matsu. He's actually one of my favorite characters that's like a side character in One Piece. He's just really cool. And I would love to see him again. We cut back to Logtown as he's there at his shop just like snoozing. And he just like, during this chapter when Zoro's fighting King, he's just like, I feel like that Sandai is getting its use right now. He's like in his shop, like reading the newspaper while all this crazy crap's going on right now. It's just like, yeah. Well, anyway, Zoro remembers when he found the Sandai at Ippon Matsu's shop way back at Logtown, and he remembers like, oh, it's a cursed sword, right? And so he did the test of luck and he got it. And Ippon Matsu, we see him in the flashback, he's like, it's cursed, you fool! The Katetsu blades have been renowned, but they're also cursed. If you pick one up, you're gonna die a horrible bloody death. Alright, so keep that in mind. That will be relevant. It's like all of Zoro, like Zoro is remembering all of his swords and what makes them all unique and different. And this is all going to tie back together into a story involving Kouzaburo. So Oda, 10 points out of 10 for the storytelling themes in this chapter. It's great. Okay. He lands on the ground, and he sees the Wado land right next to him. The Wado kind of lands, you know, like it lands in the blades in the ground, and so Zoro gets up, and he's just like, Wado Ichimonji, I'm glad you didn't go that far. And then he picks up the Wado. And then he remembers, of course, that this used to be Kuina's sword, and the flashback where after Kuina died, after she was defeated on the staircase by a rival swordsperson, no, she fell down the stairs. That's the canon reason why she died. Somebody the other day on Twitter was like, Tekking said that there was another translation where she was defeated by a rival swordsman, so maybe that means that this... I'm like, no. That wasn't a translation. That was a censorship thing that the 4Kids One Piece dub had to do. The 4Kids One Piece dub... Kuina did not technically die in that dub. She was defeated by a swordsman from a rival dojo, and she did not want to fight anymore, because they can't have, like, somebody die in 4Kids land. So that's what happened. That's not a translation. No, the official canon explanation is she fell down the stairs and she's dead. Now, you could say maybe it's revealed she isn't actually dead. That was like a cover story. Maybe Kuina's secretly working for the Revolutionary Army or something. I don't know. Maybe, possibly. But that is the official story. Anyway, the Wado was Kuina's sword. That was originally Koshiro's sword, who's, you know, Kuina's father. And Koshiro's father, who we find out in the SBS, is Kouzaburo. Okay? And Kouzaburo was the one that forged the Wado Ichimonji, along with the Enma. He made both, okay? And so, he remembers the story, Zoro, he's just like, Kuina died, can I have her sword? And Koshiro's just like, yeah, I guess so. I suppose so. It's not a very epic moment. It's just like, Sensei, Kuina died. Can I have her Owazamono grade sword? Yeah, I guess so. Here you go. I'm not getting any use out of it. I'm like, okay, cool, thank you. And oh, by the way, something I did want to bring up. I went back and I reread the chapters where Zoro goes to Logtown and he's in Ippon Matsu's shop and he meets Tashigi there and everything like that. And not a lot of new stuff to bring up, but there is one scene that is interesting where when Tashigi sees the Wado for the first time and she begins to nerd out and she goes into her little book and she's like, that's the Wado Ichimonji, that's the road to harmony, it's an Owazamono, it's like worth at least 1,000,000 berries. Zoro seems a little bit dumbfounded that that's even the name of the sword. He's like, Wado? Like, I don't know, I might be misreading it or whatever, but the scene, and go back and see it for yourself, but the scene seems to imply Zoro did not even know the name of the Wado Ichimonji. He knew that it was Kuina's sword, but he didn't know it had a name. So that's a little weird that, like, Kuina or Koshiro never told him the name of the sword, because he seems like he's hearing it for the first time when he was in Logtown. Go back and reread and rewatch the scene in the anime. It's a little strange. Anyway, so he remembers that scene, and then he's like, wait a second, it's all starting to click together here, right? Okay. He remembers that Tenguyama told him Kouzaburo made the Enma and also the Wado, and he didn't have time to really think about it back then because he was in the middle of training, although it's a little weird that he's in the middle of fighting King right now. I didn't have time to really ponder how a sword from Wano ended up in the East Blue back then. But now that I'm in pitched combat with a giant Pteranodon and could die at any second, yeah, now is a good time to think about this. Now I'm pondering this mystery. We're gonna get to the bottom of this, okay? So Zoro begins to connect the dots, and then finally, he remembers he picks up Enma, and he remembers training with Enma with Momo, and Momo goes up to Zoro, and he's like, I was told not to say the Tsunachi phrase anymore, you know, Okiku told me not to say that. And Zoro's like, oh, well, I've actually never used it myself. I heard it said once by this old geezer that used to live in my village, but I just never used it myself. I mean, you can if you want, you can if you don't. I just said it because I heard it from that guy. And so now we finally have the flashback where Zoro remembers, he begins to connect all the pieces together, and he's like, holy crap, wait a second. Cursed blade, made in Wano, ended up in the east in Logtown. Wado Ichimonji, crafted by Kouzaburo Shimasuke. I grew up in Shimosuke Village. The Enma, also made by Kouzaburo, guardian of the underworld. Wait a second, Tsunachi, the phrase, Wano, old man, Kuina, Koshiro, onigiri, rice dumplings, holy crap! That old man from my village was actually Kouzaburo Shimasuke, oh my god! And it's like, he realizes it, right, that it took Zoro a while. It took him a while. I mean, we figured this out like 3 years ago, but like, it took him a while, but he got there, okay? He got there, all right? To be fair, he has lost a lot of blood. He fought against 2 emperors today, plus King. He's kind of out of it, all right? It took a while for Zoro to connect the dots, all right? So, now we get a flashback 13 years ago at Shimosuke Village in the East Blue, which is Zoro's hometown, all right? He mentions that there was an old man that would always sit on the cliff of the village and would, like, fish in the ocean below. But Zoro never learned his name, all right? He was just some old geezer that lived in the village. Also, at this time, Zoro was a little kid, and he was practicing to become the greatest swordsman. Becoming the greatest swordsman was always Zoro's dream. Even before Kuina died, it was both of their dreams to become the greatest swordsman in the world, all right? After Kuina died, he decided to take it on for her as well, but he always wanted to be the greatest swordsman, even before Kuina passed away, right? So he didn't really pay a lot of attention to the fact that there was like some old man on the edge of the village. Who cares? Like, he's not going to learn his name, right? Whatever. So 13 years ago, Zoro is 21 right now, so that means this flashback is when Zoro was 8. Also remember, Kuina died 11 years ago, I think, so when Zoro was 10. So Kuina is still alive in this flashback, and we actually find out, is Zoro's like, I never learned his name, but I found out that he passed, after he passed passed away, that he was Kuina's grandfather. Now, we already learned that from the backstory with the SBS and everything that Oda explained to us. But this is interesting because it means Kouzaburo right now in the story is dead. All right, now he was already an old guy when Zoro knew him, so that makes sense. So the timeline of events is Zoro begins to train, begins to fight Kuina, and try to become the greatest swordsman in the world, and then he meets Kouzaburo. Kouzaburo tells him some stuff we're going to learn in a second here, and then Kouzaburo dies. Kuina and Koshiro go to his funeral. That's when Zoro finds out that the man was actually her grandfather, and then after that, that's when Kuina dies, and then Zoro becomes, he gets the Wado, and he wants to become the greatest swordsman, and he trains in the village, I think until he's about 17 or 18, and then he leaves to go be a bounty hunter and fulfill his dream, and Kuina's dream as well. Okay, so that's basically the timeline of events we're working with here, okay? And so, the first meeting with this old man, he's just like, Sanachi. Yes, it's a phrase that we used to yell back in the day. It was a phrase to summon up your courage and dive headlong into danger. And maybe, just maybe, you'll come out ahead of the game. Those were the days. And Zoro's like, he's A tier, and he's just like, yeah, that sounds really stupid. I'm not going to say that. So that was the origin of that, He's just like, yeah, that's a really stupid phrase. I'm not going to say that. It would be like equivalent of like you going to talk to your grandfather and your grandfather's like, yes, back in the day, we used to play kick the can. And it's like, yeah, I'm not going to do that, grandfather. I'm going to go and play some PlayStation 5. He's like, oh, well, back in the day, that was our PlayStation 5. Oh, man, I remember when those new cans came out. It took forever to try to find one, and they were so expensive. People were selling that. They were the greatest cans in the business. Can 5, Anyway, it's kind of like that. It's just like a generational thing, so it's kind of funny. But anyway, Zoro kind of starts training around the cliff where the old man is fishing, and he's like, hey, all the other kids in the dojo say you used to be a samurai, old man. Is that true? And the old man is just like, and by the way, the title card we get is literally just village geezer or old man from the village. It's not revealed. I mean, he's Kouzaburo, but yeah. Also, his appearance is very similar to the way that Oda anthropomorphized Wado Ichimonji. So in the SBS, like, people would ask Oda, like, draw the Wado and the Shusui and Enma and everybody if they had, like, actual, like, forms like Zanpakuto spirits from Bleach. And Oda drew the Wado Ichimonji like this, and the appearance with, like, the eyebrow, like the unibrow, that is Kouzaburo's appearance. Okay, so that is pretty funny. It's just Kouzaburo's a lot older here. He's probably, like, in his 80s, maybe even older at this point when Zoro met him, okay? So anyway, he's like, hey, are you a samurai, old man? And Kouzaburo's like, quiet down, you stupid youngster. If the Navy finds out about it, they'll haul me in. And Zoro's like, why would the Navy care about that? Honestly, I mean, yeah, the Navy would probably care about that a little bit. I mean, it would be more about Wano, like, because you're not allowed to leave Wano. But yeah, if the Navy found out an ex-samurai from Wano country was in the East, they would probably want to stop by for at least a couple of questions. You get the idea? Well, anyway, Zoro's just like, whatever, who cares? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, you stupid old geezer. And so Zoro continues to train throughout the weeks and months around where Kouzaburo is fishing, and he's like, don't you like the dojo? Why do you always have to train around here? This is my quiet space, I'm trying to fish, damn it. And Zoro's just like, man, I keep trying to fight Kuina, but I keep losing every single time. I gotta get stronger. And Kouzaburo's like, whatever, you stupid kid. And so one day, though, Zoro shows up, and Kouzaburo gives him 2 katanas. And he's like, what? You're giving me 2 extra katanas? I can't pay for these. And he's like, just take them. They're the only ones I can make anymore. The arthritis in my hands, I ain't what I used to be. Back in the day, I used to be the greatest swordsmanship smith. I used to make swords back in the day, kid. And there was one sword in particular I made. I tell you, you get the chills just by touching it. It was the mighty... It was the mighty Enma, the guardian of hell. Alright, so anyway, he gives Zoro these 2 katanas, and he's like, yeah, I can only make these ones, okay? I'm old now, Swordsmithing requires a lot of focus. You gotta have a steady hand, and, he's really old here, so, the best he can make are like these unnamed, unranked blades. I think, and it's maybe not 100%, but I think these are the same katanas Zoro had at the beginning of the manga. Those two, they had like a black scabbard and like the little red sort of inlay on the hilt, and those are the ones that were destroyed by Mihawk when Mihawk used, when Zoro used his 3,000 worlds and only the Wado survived and those two katanas were destroyed. I'm pretty sure these are the same katanas. Now, when I say pretty sure, there's other tellings of the story, like there's some extra stuff in the anime, like the episode where Zoro first meets Johnny and Yosaku, and he fights against Wicked Dick. It was explained in that episode that Zoro had destroyed other katanas, like, so it's possible, I mean, he got these swords, you know, Kouzaburo says these two katanas are pretty low ranking, and they're not really much, they're kind of crap swords, so it's possible Zoro could have destroyed these at other points when he was training, or he destroyed them later while he was out bounty hunting, and he got new ones, but I think at least in the canon of the manga, yeah, these are the same swords that were destroyed by Mihawk. So it's kind of crazy when you think about it that, like, yeah, he was the greatest swordsmith in the entire world, but, you know, age catches up to all of us, right? You can't make an Enma or a Wado when your hands are shaking and you can barely remember what you had for breakfast this morning, right? You know, just like, hey, darn it, you know, so it makes sense. Anyway, it's a nice little origin story for those two unnamed swords. So the training begins to continue, and it's not really training. It's not like Kouzaburo's teaching him how to swing a sword or anything. He's really just telling him about what swords really are, and we find out a lot about what cursed blades are here, and I love it, because we basically find out what cursed blades really do, or what it's all about, right? Like, are they possessed by evil spirits, or demons, or devils? Like, what's the story? No. So Kouzaburo, he takes out a sword, and he's just like, look, swords are like kitchen knives, but for murder. Their sole purpose, when they are crafted by a swordsmith, is to take life, to cause as much bloodshed and death and devastation as possible. Zoro's like 8, and he's like, listen up here, son. Swords are meant to kill. Kill as much as you can. You know, like, that's basically what he's telling Zoro. And Zoro's like, okay, I don't know if I should hang out with you anymore. He's just like, anyway, listen up. All right? They're also, every sword has its own personality, okay? And it's up to the swordsman, or swordswoman, to master that personality and bend it to their own will. You know, there's some weak swordsmen out there that pick up a really fine blade, a Meito blade sword, and they say it's cursed. And because they get hurt, or they die, or, you know, it sends like a tingle down their spine or whatever. But that's all a bunch of hogwash. You don't understand. It just means that the sword is a true piece of masterwork. It's a Meito, and it's the swordsman or swordswoman that's the problem. You know, they're not strong enough when they pick up the blade, all right? So that's what we find out what cursed blades are. When a weak swordsman picks up a sword, and it's a Meito, like, so when a regular person were to pick up Zoro's Wado or Enma or something, like, that's when they're just like, it's cursed! I can feel an evil presence emanating from this sword, you know, and because they're not skilled enough to wield it, okay? And, you know, Kouzaburo says, whenever somebody says that a sword is cursed, I actually accept that as a badge of honor. That's a good thing. That means I'm doing my job right. My job is to make swords. What are swords for? Cutting people down. Oh, boo-hoo. You have a cursed sword that slays everybody? You have a Katetsu sword that cuts everybody down? Good! That's what they're meant for! That means you have a good-ass sword! He's like, no, I can't. It's too strong. It's like, alright, well, be gone with you, knave. You know, that's basically the situation here, alright? So that kind of sheds some new light on that whole scene we had at Logtown when Zoro picks up the Sandai and he throws it up into the air and it like goes around his arm, right? It wasn't like it's because there's an actual curse, like the embodiment of Katetsu's like evil is inside of it. No, Zoro was just really lucky there with the way he threw the blade up. It wasn't like some evil presence was guiding the sword. It just means that the sword was crafted very expertly, okay? Now, Kouzaburo does go on to say that swords sort of have their own personalities as well, not to the level of like Zanpakuto do in Bleach, but they have their own personality. Some swords are more like troublemakers than others. And Zoro even admits this when he first got the Sandai. And remember in in Whiskey Peak, when he was using it for the first time against the Baroque Works agents, he was cutting down a bunch of bounty hunters, and he admitted that Sandai was like cutting more in, he was actually like killing people, and he didn't want to do that. And he's just like, hey, Sandai, you know, you're a troublemaker, you know, you cut what I tell you you can cut, right? It's kind of like that. So yeah, it's like a sort of thing like that, where some swords are more troublemakers, some swords are more like keen to like follow their master's wishes in that respect. Like the Wado, for instance. See, here's the thing. The Wado is an Owazamono grade sword, but Zoro never admitted to, like, oh, it's too strong, you know, I can't wield this. So I like to think in that respect that the Wado, its personality is more amenable to Zoro, where it used to belong to Kuina, and then, you know, Kuina died, and then Zoro had it. It's almost like the sword kind of accepted Zoro as its wielder, of just like, okay, this, you know, Zoro will be the one that wields me, and he will be the one to carry out that dream that Kuina had, and he has as well. So Zoro did not get the feeling of like, oh, it's a cursed blade, I can't handle it, even though it's an Owazamono. Maybe also something similar to Shusui, where Ryuma kind of, well, Ryuma's corpse gave it to Zoro, and so Zoro had the Shusui, and he's just like, all right, he can kind of wield it. The Sandai was a lot more difficult to manage. Okay, Zoro had to kind of prove himself to the Sandai. Yubashiri, you know, it was in an attic in his in Ippon Matsu's shop for years, and so, you know, Yubashiri's personality was probably just ecstatic to have somebody wielding the sword again. Okay, and so Yubashiri followed along with Zoro. So then you get to Enma though, and Enma was a sword that was wielded by Odin. And so we sort of transition back to the present here. Let me just make sure if there's anything else I'm missing. Kouzaburo goes on to explain that, like, oh, the first sword, my masterpiece, my magnum opus that I crafted when I was still young, I named it the Guardian of Hell, and it was the greatest sword ever. You would get a tingle down your spine just by touching it, and that's, of course, Enma. And so Zoro begins to connect the dots. We transition back to the future, and he's like, wait a second, Enma, Guardian of Hell, holy crap, that old man was Kouzaburo Shimasuki. So that's when he makes the realization, and, you know, like Tengu Yama's like, oh yeah, Kouzaburo, he left this country about 55 years ago. Zoro, the cogs are spinning, he understands, and so he gets up and he picks up Enma, and he's like, holy crap, that's what you were doing, Enma. You weren't cursed or anything, you were testing me, because the last person to wield this sword was Kozuki Odin. And so Zoro's like, holy crap, Odin could swing this thing as light as a feather, even though it was sucking out all of his haki at the same time. And so no duh, you know, Odin's sword is gonna test the next person to pick it up. But it's almost like an initiation, kind of like Enma's like, you might be worthy, but let's see how you can handle this, and begins to absorb his haki, okay? So he gets back up, and some other random members of the Beast Pirates. Zoro got knocked back into the hall at this point. Like, he's back inside of the Skull Dome after King's last attack. So a bunch of the Beast Pirates are like, you know, there's Pirate Hunter Zoro, let's go get him. And Zoro, at the same time, he realizes Enma and the true nature of what a cursed blade is and what he really has to do here. He fires off a bunch of Conqueror's haki, boom! Knocks out all of the randos of the Beast Pirates, knocks all those guys out, bam! And then he just kind of gets up and he holds Enma, and King is just like, ah, so you have kingly ambitions as well. Well, I'm King, so I appreciate it. I wonder if King can use Conqueror's haki. I feel like he kind of should be able to. But anyways, like, you have kingly ambitions as well, huh? All right then. And so Zoro gets up and he's like, well, I guess instead of regulating my haki and, you know, preventing Enma from absorbing it, and instead of playing the tug of war, I'll just give Enma what it wants. I'll give it all of my haki, even if it means I might die. In fact, it might be a thing where it's like a trust exercise kind of thing, where I wonder if Zoro, like, okay, you know what? I'm gonna give it all my haki to the point where I could die. I'm gonna trust Enma, and he gives it all the haki, and then maybe then Enma will give the haki back willingly, or it'll work together with Zoro. So Zoro won't die, he won't pass out, he's just like, oh, okay, now you get it, now you're worthy, and then we get the giant haki blade, and he uses that to defeat King, perhaps. Now that doesn't happen, but that's what might happen next. Zoro begins to think like, okay, maybe the whole tug of war strategy wasn't what Enma really was trying to do. Maybe in order to use this sword properly, I have to willingly give it as much haki as I have, you know, something like that. So Zoro uses conquerors, knocks out a bunch of people. He's having better control over it now. He understands, I think, this is what it is, and so he can maybe learn to train with that and get better using conquerors. We end the chapter out, long chapter, I know, but we end the chapter out with Zoro remembering meeting Luffy, and Luffy saying the line of like, oh, you want to be the greatest swordsman in the world? Well, I'm going to be the Pirate King, so obviously the Pirate King would have the greatest swordsman in the world. Join my crew, Zoro. And Zoro picks up Enma, and he puts the Wado in his mouth. He takes the Sandai, and he's just like, I guess you're right. I do have kingly ambitions. For the will of my best friend of childhood and the will of my captain, I'm gonna defeat you. And then that's the end of the chapter. Boom! Alright? So he's like, because of Luffy and Kuina, I'm gonna win. I'm gonna be the king. I'm gonna be the strongest swordsman. End of chapter. Oh, boy howdy, we got ourselves a lot of stuff. Yeah, I'm going to be making a follow-up video on this on tomorrow, Monday, like I normally do, but man, there was a lot of stuff to unpack with that. A lot of crap. So I guess the end of the day, the most important thing to learn, I guess, is that curse blades are not like, you know, oh, you know, Kitetsu would have been like a mass murderer and he imposed his murderous intent into the sword and it's actually cursed with like the spirit of the damned or something like that. That would have been way more cool, but that's not the case. The Kitetsu blades certainly do have a troubling personality, which probably makes them very difficult to master, and if you pick up a Kitetsu sword and you don't know what you're doing, then instead of you bending the sword's personality to your will, it's the other way around, where the sword kind of guides you. And that's sort of kind of what happened at Whiskey Peak when Sandai was kind of cutting some people down and Zoro didn't like that. Also, remember at Water 7 when Zoro got stuck in the chimney. It's a weird story, One Piece. Anyway, he got stuck in the chimney and Chopper had the Kitetsu and Zoro just kind of sensed that it was with him. Like, hey Chopper, do you have the Kitetsu with you right now? He's like, yeah, I got it right here. How did you know? And he's just like, I could tell. It's cursed. So, curse was what they were saying, but it was more about like, I can sense its personality, or, you know, it's a difficult sword to master, it kind of gives off a certain vibe. So that's all it means, okay? And I actually just made a video this past week talking about, like, some secrets of Enma, and I was like, well, if the Kitetsu is considered a cursed blade for all the stuff it does, Enma has to be considered a cursed blade as well. So I was so close to that. I felt like I almost had it, but I didn't. I didn't exactly figure it out 100%, but it's like, wait a second, if the Kitetsu's cursed, then the Enma also has to be cursed, even though if nobody else really called it a cursed blade. And also Law's sword, Kikoku. Do I have Kikoku? Is that easily accessible? Yoru, which, you know, Yoru also probably considered a cursed blade. Any sword that's a high enough rank. Like, I don't think, like, okay, let me put it this way. If Mihawk just decided to set down his Yoru one day, he's just like, I'm gonna go work in my garden, and he just sets down Yoru on the coffee table, and he puts on his sun hat, and he goes out to, you know, work in his garden. And if somebody just, like, if somebody walked by, like if Perona walked by and was like, hold on, I'm gonna try to pick up, you know, Mihawk's sword. You know, I'm gonna pick up Mihawk's sword and see what it feels like. Like if Perona, who has no training with a sword, tried to like even touch Yoru, she would probably be like, ah! You know, she'd be like terrified by it, probably. But so it technically is a cursed sword, but it's not like it has like Mihawk's vampire aura in it or anything. It's just like, it's such a perfected, refined blade wielded with such finesse and power that anybody that doesn't know what they're doing touches it, they'll be like freaked out. They get like goosebumps or something, like, oh, you know, you can't wield it. It gives you like a weird feeling, like you're gonna die if you wield this thing, right? So that's Yoru. You know, what else do we have back here? Oh, Whitebeard's Murakumogiri, same thing, you know. It's actually, you know what? That actually gives me new belief now why they just left it in the damn grave. You know, that always kind of bugged me. This is a Saijo Owazamono grade blade. This is Murakumogiri, wielded by Whitebeard, one of the emperors, right? And so you just left it on some random island in his tombstone for anybody just to come by and just pick up. Well, maybe that's the reason why Marco and Jozu and everybody were cool with that, because it's like, that's Pop's sword. And maybe there was even a time when Marco was like, hey, Pops, can I pick up your Bicento? And, you know, Whitebeard was like, all right, you could give it a shot. And Marco's like, ah, you know, and maybe even Vista. Vista's like, can I wield your Bicento there, Pops? And he's just like, all right, why not? Here you go. And even Vista was like, whoa, I can't wield this. Like, like, it's just the personality, the power coming off of it. It's just like, it's too much, right? And so maybe that's the why they just left it in the grave. Because it's like, nobody's going to be able to get near this thing. Anybody that even, okay, it's in the New World to begin with, so it's already kind of safe, and it's on some island that, you know, Marco, I think it's Sphinx Island. I think it's the same island Marco was guarding. But like, even if anybody did get to the island and tried to pick up this sword, nobody's just going to be able to pick it up and wield it. Even to sell it, you know, anybody even touches this thing is just going to be like, whoa, okay, I don't know anything about blades, but all I know is this thing is bad news, right? You touch this thing and it's just like, I feel like I'm gonna die in less than 24 hours if I pick up this sword. And also, can you imagine if some random grave robbers ended up at Whitebeard's grave? They'd be like, they wouldn't have no idea what's going on. They think like, this is a cursed blade of Whitebeard's spirit, and like Whitebeard will haunt you if you try to remove it. That would probably be the implication that they would feel, okay? Now, if somebody really strong shows up and tries to take it, different story. But, you know, how many people could really wield Whitebeard's Bicento? So that makes a little bit more sense why it was just left in the grave. Okay? What was I looking for? Kikoku? Where is Kikoku? Alright, I can't find Kikoku, so that's a problem. I need to look for that later. I don't know where that one ended up. But anyway, yeah, Kikoku is Law's sword. It's unranked. It doesn't have a rank or a Meito, but it's named. It's named Kikoku, Demon's Wail, and it's cursed. So that's actually an interesting... That's actually an interesting exception, because the way that Kouzaburo spoke about it is a sword has to have a really high rank in order to be considered cursed, or a rank to be considered cursed. And with Kikoku, it doesn't have a rank. It's not even a Wazumono. It doesn't even have the lowest rank, but it's still considered, you know, cursed to be terrified. So I don't know, Law might straight up just have a cursed blade, like the souls of 1,000 people might be locked in his blade. I could believe that with Law. Or maybe it's just Law's the first person to get it, so it doesn't have any renown yet, but it's through Law that it will gain renown throughout the world, possibly, something like that. Anyway, that's the chapter. I already feel like this is a really long review. We'll get more into this tomorrow when I do the follow-up, but thanks for watching, everybody. Hope you guys enjoy. This is one of the best chapters of 2021, easily. Tekking101 signing out. Swords!